I basically taught myself, and then I'd always been buying and selling things. My dad had a small coin shop, and I wanted to open a pawn shop. Rick Harrison just confirmed what no fan wanted to hear. Adam is gone, Chumlee is in jail, and everything he built is falling apart. The Pawn Stars empire, which was once a goldmine of success, is now drowning in trouble. How did it go from fame and fortune to this heartbreaking disaster? Tune in to find out the truth behind the upcoming closing of the famous pawn shop. Fame costs a lot in a pawn shop. Pawn Stars wasn't just another show. It was built on hard work, determination, and Rick's sharp instincts. He learned the trade from his father, a strict businessman who knew how to turn junk into gold. When the shop first opened, it was all about the deals, the haggling, and the stories behind the items. But as soon as the cameras came in, that strong foundation started to fall apart. Fame changes people, and the Harrison family wasn't immune. Pawn Stars came at a high cost, and what happened next will shock you. On the surface, business was booming, but behind the scenes, things were getting ugly. Lawsuits were being filed, money disputes were happening, and family members started fighting with each other. By the time the pandemic hit, the shop's profits had dropped from the millions of dollars they used to make, to just barely making it. All the big pawn shops in town are now owned by huge chains, like EasyCore, which has about 1,000 stores. And even though America has 1,000 stores like Walmart, Rick wasn't worried about money. What was going on in his own family was much worse. Rick's son was in a terrible legal battle. The details aren't clear, but what is clear is that he is facing serious consequences. Even though Rick tried to keep the news from getting out, it did, and it hit him like a sledgehammer. No one wants to see their son's future disappear. But for Rick, this was just one more problem on a long list. There's Chumlee, the likable goofball on TV who makes a lot of bad choices off-screen. His house was raided and police found shocking illegal drugs, registered guns, and enough evidence to get him in a lot of trouble. He avoided serious jail time, but his reputation took a huge hit. Fans were shocked at how the funny, easygoing guy from TV got himself into such a mess. It doesn't stop there. Even Rick's mother turned against him. She sued him, saying he tricked her into giving up her share of the business while she was in a coma. The lawsuit called for a full financial investigation into over $500,000. It was tough, but we got through it. That room was exciting. Remember, we had to cut out half of it just to film it, because there was a cameraman, a soundman, and the seller, Rick Chumlee. Even his own mother saw him as the enemy. As if that wasn't bad enough, Corey, the so-called responsible one, had his own problems. He was careless, angry, and always in trouble, and he managed to bring the family name into even more disrepute, with a wrecked RV, unpaid debts, and bar fights. This wasn't the image of a clean-cut businessman that the show tried to sell. Pawn Stars was becoming less about rare finds and more about rare-life scandals. Some of the so-called experts who appeared on the show were just as troublesome as the family itself. One was caught in a domestic violence case, and another was caught authenticating fake sports memorabilia, which caused a scandal that shook the whole industry. The show's credibility was falling, and fans could see that what was once a fun and educational show about unique treasures was turning into a reality TV disaster. Once upon a time, Pawn Stars had a spark. It felt real, unpredictable, and full of surprises. But as the seasons went on, Rick Harrison's magic started to fade. There were no longer any spontaneous moments. Everything felt too planned and polished. Negotiations were less about the thrill of the deal and more about back and forth that always ended the way you'd expect. In the family drama, well, that took center stage and pushed out what made the show fun in the first place. Rick wasn't just sitting back though, he had big dreams, and one of them was Pawn Plaza, a whole shopping center built near the shopping center. He tried to expand his empire beyond the reality show, but like many other big business plans, this one failed. Local businesses blamed Rick for not promoting the area properly, which led to lawsuits, and whatever vision he had for the place turned out to be just another failed attempt to cash in on his fame. In the meantime, the show kept going, but even the biggest fans couldn't deny that Pawn Stars wasn't what it used to be. Rick knew the show was losing its appeal. He tried to keep his wealth together by investing in real estate and other businesses in the hopes that one would pay off. The shop had seen it all. Huge wins, crushing losses, and everything in between. But now even the deals were starting to feel off. Sellers kept coming in, each sure they had something priceless, only to be met with cold reality. More and more people came in hoping to make a lot of money, but not everything was worth as much as they thought. He owned the place and was holding what looked like a normal British 10B note, but it wasn't. It had been marked by Banky, the famous street artist. The seller thought he had gold in his hands, but the old man wasn't buying it because all he saw was vandalized cash that wasn't worth anything at first glance. The seller pushed back, saying that Banksy's work was worth thousands of dollars. The old man wasn't impressed, so he brought in an expert. It turned out to be real Banksy art, but it wasn't the rare kind and was probably only worth a few $100s at most. The seller, who was hoping to make a lot of money, wanted $500. The old man told him he had no chance, and after a lot of negotiating the seller got $400. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't the jackpot he was hoping for. Then there was the Navy veteran who came in with an old sextant that had been used on the USS Hector, a repair ship during World War II. The veteran told stories, and the old man liked military history, but let's be honest, who navigates by sextant anymore? The seller wanted almost $400, but the old man, ever the skilled negotiator, said no, offered $200. But the seller refused, saying that collectors of this kind of thing weren't exactly lining up. They finally agreed on $265, saying, "How about that? Can you go $265? Now I'd be comfortable with $265. Corey, give him the $265 us." It was good money, but not the big payday the seller was hoping for. Another seller came in with an old black and white panoramic photo of a World War II airfield in Las Vegas. It looked cool, but was it worth anything? The seller was sure it would. Go for at least $500. The old man didn't blink. He told the seller that just because something is old doesn't mean it's valuable. He said that history buffs might like it, but that didn't mean it would sell out in seconds. The seller held on to hope and countered with $400. The old man stayed stone cold and threw out a measly $100. The seller, shocked, tried to bargain, but to no avail. He left the pawnshop with his valuable photo still in hand, learning the hard way that sentimental value doesn't pay the bills. Then came the real deal. A Savage Navy revolver from the Civil War. It was rare, it looked funny, and the seller knew he had something special. He started the bidding at $1,800, but the old man wasn't interested. He called in a gun expert, who confirmed it was real, but also told him why it wasn't exactly a hit back in the day. It was heavy, awkward, and not the most useful weapon for its time. Collectors would love it, but even they had limits. The expert valued it at about $2,000, which was still a lot of money for the seller. The man wasn't interested in overpaying, so he made an offer of $800. The seller almost choked on that amount, so he hard fought back by countering at $1,250. $800, Rick, he said, that's not going to happen. I'm thinking more like $1,250 though. The old man wouldn't budge, so they traded numbers back and forth. In the end, the deal closed at $400, which was good for the seller. The old man still knew he had the upper hand. Buying and selling collectibles is a lot like walking into a pawnshop with what you think is a gold mine and leaving with a heavy dose of reality. The excitement of an item can fade quickly when money is on the table. Just ask the guy who thought he was sitting on a small fortune with his signed 1951 New York Yankees baseball. At first glance, it seemed like the perfect find for any sports collector. A ball signed by legends like Mickey Mantle and Joe Daggio. That should be worth a lot of money. Not so fast. The thing was worn out, the ink was fading, and worst of all, there were no authentication papers. A smart buyer knows that a signature doesn't mean anything without proof. The old man who ran the shop didn't want to risk his money, so he called in an expert. The expert said the ball was real, but in such bad shape that it was almost worthless. The seller came in hoping to get $33,000, but a $800 offer crushed him and he left with the ball. Dreams don't pay the bills. Some sellers were upset, but others brought in. Then there were the collectibles that shocked everyone in the pawnshop. A homemade Ghostbusters proton pack with flashing lights and sound effects. The seller was proud of his work and thought that any collector would jump at the chance to own it. He asked $2,000, but the old man wasn't impressed. He knew that nerd collectibles could sell, but only if they were the real thing. A screen user movie prop would be worth something, but a fan-made copy wouldn't. The shop owner made an offer of $1,000, which the seller thought about for a while but eventually accepted. He probably spent more than that on the statue itself, but at least he had cash for his next project. Then, there was a huge 6-foot-tall wooden statue of a Native American chief. It had been sitting outside the seller's grandfather's tobacco shop for decades, which gave it sentimental value but not much value in the world of buying and selling. The seller wanted $900 for it, saying, "Donate it. I'm trying to sell it." "What are you trying to get out of it?" the old man asked. "I think it might be worth about $9." The old man barely kept a straight face before countering with $400. There was a tough battle of wills, but in the end, the old man wouldn't budge if he couldn't flip it for a profit. There was no deal to be made, and the seller gave it to the old man. Another win for the pawn shop. Some days it felt more like an art gallery, with big names, big hopes. One seller came in with what he said was a Picasso ceramic owl vase. Now, Picasso made a lot of these vases as part of a limited edition in the 1940s and 1950s, but that doesn't mean they are rare. The seller was sure he had struck gold. He had owned the vase for over 35 years and was ready to sell it for a bold $335,000. Of course, the pawn shop wasn't going to believe him, so an expert came in to take a closer look. The vase was real. It had all the right stamps, and the good news was that the vase had marks and was in almost perfect condition. The bad news was that prices online were all over the place. Some sellers listed them for $61,000, but that's just wishful thinking. The real market value was more like $25,000 to $100,000 at most. The pawn shop made an offer of $115,000, but the seller laughed it off. Negotiations went on for a long time, and neither side was willing to blink. In the end, they agreed on $177,000, which isn't bad for an old vase that had been sitting around collecting dust for decades. Just when you think you've seen it all, another Picasso item shows up, this time a framed print from the 1950s. The seller said it was a rare piece called Goat Skull on Table and was part of a limited run of 150 prints. An appraiser had put its value at almost $119,000. The seller thought he could get $6,000 for it at $11.95. I think $16,000 is a good price. This is pretty cool. What period of Picasso's is this from? It's from around 1953, when he was 71 years old. The pawn shop wasn't going to give that much money without calling an expert. It turned out the print was an award tint etching, which is a fancy word for it looked like a. It was a watercolor that wasn't hand-painted. It was valuable, but not worth $6,000. The best offer they could make was $11,000, and the seller hesitated but eventually took it. Another Picasso was sold, and the pawn shop got another expensive piece for its collection. It was just another day at the shop when a man came in with 6 etchings from an exclusive book by Picasso. He wanted $5,000, probably thinking that having Picasso's name on them would make them instantly valuable. But here's the: some of Picasso's work sells for millions of dollars, while others only get a few $100s. The experts confirmed that the etchings were real and were part of a rare book called Lis Est Strada. The best part was that Picasso himself signed the book, which changed everything. A full set could fetch $10,000 or even more if sold individually, but Rick wasn't going to give up $5,000 without a fight. The seller, wanting to make more money, tried to get Rick to pay more. The price up to $6,000. After some back and forth, Rick finally gave in and paid $6,000. Another set of Picasso prints found a new home, and the seller got more than he had expected. It was a win-win situation, but the Picasso parade wasn't over yet. Just when it looked like they had seen it all, valuable art showed up, leading to tricky deals and lessons in how important a signature is. Soon after, another seller showed up with what he called a Picasso print from the Celestine Collection 1968. The problem: there was no paperwork. In the art world, not having paperwork is like trying to sell a car without a title. A huge red flag. Rick called in his trusted art expert to take a closer look. After looking at the paper quality, plate marks, and overall condition, the expert said it was real. But before anyone got too excited, there was a catch. Picasso had made a lot of these, and without his signature, they weren't exactly worth a lot of money. Let's be honest. When it comes to buying and selling art, things aren't always what they seem. Things aren't always what they seem. People often think that what they paid for a piece is close to what it's worth. But that's not always the case. I could have kept it for a few more years, but I honestly don't think the economy will get any better in the next 5 years. Hopefully I'm wrong, especially when it comes to art bought on cruise ships. That's exactly what happened. When a seller came into the shop, hoping to sell a print he was hoping to get a good price for the print that his family had bought years ago. But he was let down quickly. The print's market value was between $2,000 and $3,000. That seems like a good amount, but the seller's face quickly changed when he realized how much his family had paid for it years ago at a cruise ship auction, a shocking $99,000. That's more than 3 times its real value. You could almost feel the regret in the air. Art at inflated prices, and this was another case of someone falling for that trick. Rick, who is always looking for a deal, didn't think twice before making an offer that was $1,500 less than what the seller probably wanted. The room went silent for a moment, and you could tell that the seller was thinking about how much money he and his family had lost. Deep down, he knew he wasn't going to find another buyer willing to pay even close to what they had paid the first time. So after a moment of hesitation, he sighed and accepted the offer. When it looked like the shop was out of Picasso pieces, another seller walked in with not 1 but 2 prints. The first was an etching of a dove, and the second was called Poor Roby. These weren't just any prints though, they were made by Picasso himself. Even if you don't know much about art, you've probably heard of Pablo Picasso. He's one of the most famous artists of all time. A famous artist recently had a painting sold for over $100 million. However, just because a piece is real, doesn't mean it's rare. And in the art world, rarity is everything. An expert looked at both prints and confirmed they were real, which was good news. But it didn't mean they were valuable. The dove etching was a mass-produced lithograph, which meant there were many copies out there. On its best day it might sell for $200, or even more if the right person comes along. There was a collector who offered a small amount, but Poor Roby was different. This print had potential. It was an early edition printed on high-quality paper, which made it much more desirable. In the right setting like an art auction or the hands of a serious collector, it could fetch anywhere from $800 to $1,500. The seller had a price in mind. He wanted $1,000 for both pieces, but Rick wasn't interested in the dove print. He saw where the real value was and made his move, offering $650 for Poor Roby alone. The seller hesitated. It's never easy to give up something you think is worth more, but he took the money anyway because he knew that finding a buyer willing to pay top dollar was never a sure thing. Sometimes it's better to take what you can get than to wait for a miracle that may never come. Do you think Rick Harrison is just going through a rough patch, or is something much darker tearing his world apart? Let us know what you think, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.